14 minutes into the broadcast, Diana looked directly into Carson's eyes and said, "I made myself sick before the ceremony. On purpose, I wanted to disappear inside that dress." Carson's pen stopped moving. The studio, 312 seats, every one of them filled, made no sound at all. Floor director Gary Kaplan would later say he forgot to breathe. This was not what was supposed to happen. The segment had been negotiated for 6 weeks. Buckingham Palace had sent a 4-page document listing approved topics. The Tonight Show's legal team had reviewed it twice. Diana was booked for 12 minutes, enough time for charming anecdotes about her sons, a polite mention of her landmine campaign, and exactly 0 revelations about the private collapse of the most-watched marriage in modern history. But there was something about that ring, a 12-carat sapphire that caught the studio lights every time Diana moved her left hand. Carson had noticed it in the first minute. By the 7th minute, he understood that Diana noticed him noticing. At minute 11, he broke every rule he had agreed to. He did not ask about Charles. He asked about the ring. And the answer Diana gave did not just break the segment. It broke something in Carson that 3 decades of live television had never touched. What followed was a conversation that was never broadcast, witnessed by 43 crew members and sealed by NDAs that held for over 3 decades. I often see comments from people who didn't realize they weren't subscribed. If you enjoy the channel, please take a second to check and make sure you are subscribed. Thank you for being part of this journey with us. To understand what happened on that stage, you need to understand what happened to a girl named Diana Frances Spencer before the world decided she belonged to them. What you are about to hear is drawn from the details of 2 real lives, their documented struggles, their known histories, their private silences, and imagines the conversation that the evidence of those lives always seemed to be pointing toward. The facts about Princess Diana are real. The facts about Johnny Carson are real. The meeting between them and what was said lives in the space between what we know and what we can feel must have been true. Diana was 19 years old when she was introduced to the Prince of Wales. Not 19 in the way that a modern 19-year-old is 19, with a phone in her pocket and a world of information at her fingertips. She was 19 in the way that the daughter of an English earl is 19 in 1980, sheltered, soft-spoken, and deeply, almost dangerously eager to be loved. She worked at a kindergarten in Pimlico. She shared a flat with 3 girlfriends. She had never had a serious boyfriend. Charles was 32. He had been dating her older sister. The courtship lasted 13 meetings. Not 13 months, 13 meetings. On February 6, 1981, Charles proposed. That evening, a BBC camera crew recorded the newly engaged couple. The interviewer asked whether they were in love. Diana answered instantly, "Of course." Then they turned to Charles. And Charles, the future King of England, standing beside the girl he had just asked to marry him, said, "Whatever in love means." Diana's smile did not drop. It froze. There is a difference. A dropped smile is surprise. A frozen smile is a decision. The decision to stay exactly where you are and pretend that the ground has not just opened beneath your feet. She was given a 12-carat Ceylon sapphire ring. It was not commissioned. It was chosen from a Gerard catalog, the same catalog available to anyone in England. Diana picked it herself. She would later call that choice the last decision I was allowed to make. But that detail would become important very soon. Over the next 5 months, the machinery of the British monarchy wrapped itself around Diana Spencer. A 25-foot train was designed for her wedding dress. The guest list reached 3,500 names. Television rights were sold to 74 countries. 750 million people would watch. And inside Kensington Palace, behind the doors that none of those 750 million people could see, Diana began to vanish. She weighed 152 pounds when Charles proposed. By her wedding day, she weighed 115. Her waist shrank from 29 inches to 23. The Emmanuel team altered the dress 5 separate times. No one in the palace asked why. Diana was making herself disappear, not just from the palace but from her own body. What the world would later learn was bulimia nervosa. Diana described in 2 words, a cry for help. The morning of her wedding, Diana stood in the bathroom of Clarence's house with a tiara pinned to her hair and did the only thing she knew how to do with the panic inside her. Her sister Sarah waited outside the door. Diana came out, straightened her robe, and smiled. "Just nerves," she said. The carriage ride to St. Paul's Cathedral lasted 7 minutes. The crowd roared. Diana waved. The sapphire ring caught the morning sunlight through the carriage window. Inside that carriage, surrounded by 750,000 voices, Diana Spencer was completely silent. At this point, everyone thought they knew what was coming. They were wrong. Carson noticed the silence first. Not on the day of the wedding, a decade later in 1991, watching archive footage in his office at NBC Burbank the night before Diana's scheduled appearance. He had the wedding broadcast paused on a single frame. The carriage, Diana's face, the frozen smile. His producer Fred DeCordova walked in at 8:15. Carson did not look up. "She's performing," he said. "I've been doing this show for 29 years, Freddie. I know what performing looks like. That girl was performing for her life." DeCordova asked if they should adjust the segment. Carson shook his head. "We'll do exactly what they asked. Pleasant questions, safe territory." He paused. "But I'm going to watch her hands." This was a Carson technique few people knew about. He believed a guest's face lies first, voice lies second, but hands never lie. He had learned it from a magician named Di Vernon 50 years earlier. Watch the hands. The hands tell you when someone is ready to stop pretending. Diane arrived at NBC Burbank at 4:30, 3.5 hours before taping. She asked for a private room. A production assistant named Linda Gutierrez brought her tea. Earl Grey, no milk, no sugar. Gutierrez recalled that Diana held the teacup with both hands, the way a child holds something warm on a cold day. The sapphire ring was turned inward on her finger, the stone facing her palm, hidden. And then Diana said something that made Gutierrez pause at the door. "Do you think he's kind, Mr. Carson?" Gutierrez said yes. Diana nodded. "Good. I've used up all my brave for today." Carson noticed it immediately. The audience didn't, not yet. For the first 11 minutes, everything went according to the Buckingham Palace document. Carson asked about William and Harry. Diana's face lit up. Genuinely, the only genuine expression he had seen so far. William wants to be a policeman. Harry wants to be whatever will get the most attention. The audience laughed. He asked about the landmine campaign. Diana spoke with precision. He asked about life at Kensington Palace. She described sneaking out to a cinema in Leicester Square, wearing a baseball cap, buying her own groceries at Tesco. The audience was charmed. The producers were relaxed. DeCordova's voice came through Carson's earpiece at minute 9. "Beautiful segment, John. Wrap in 2. But Carson was not looking at his cards. He was looking at Diana's left hand. For the past 3 minutes, her thumb had been rubbing the underside of the sapphire ring, a small, repetitive, unconscious motion. Back and forth, the stone still turned inward, hidden against her palm. The hands never lie. Carson set his cards on the floor, gently, face down, as if he were putting a child to bed. The producer's voice came through the earpiece. "Johnny, we have a problem." Carson reached up and removed his earpiece. He placed it on the desk, coiled the wire neatly, and turned back to Diana. "That ring," he said. His voice was different now, lower, slower, stripped of the talk show cadence. "I've been watching you touch it all night. Not like a woman who loves her ring, like a woman who's trying to decide whether to take it off." The studio went very still. Diana looked at him. The frozen smile, the one from the carriage, the one from 1,000 photographs, did not melt. It cracked, like ice when weight is placed on it. First her eyes, then the muscles around her mouth, then her chin. "It wasn't chosen for me," Diana said. Her voice was steady, almost too steady. "I chose it, from a catalog. Did you know that? The future Princess of Wales chose her engagement ring from a catalog." She looked down at it. "That was the last thing I was allowed to choose. Stay with me, because what comes next is the part that breaks you." Carson leaned forward, not the practiced lean of a talk show host drawing out a punchline, the lean of a man who has just heard something he was not supposed to hear. "The last thing you were allowed to choose," he repeated, not as a question, as a confirmation. Diana nodded. She was still looking at the ring. "After that, everything was chosen for me. What I wore, where I went, what I said, who I smiled at, and for how long. There was a schedule for smiling. Did you know that? 30 seconds for a hospital visit, 45 for a children's ward, 15 for getting in and out of a car, and on your wedding day." Diana's thumb stopped moving on the ring. "On my wedding day, I weighed 115 pounds. I had been 152 when he proposed. 5 months, Do you know how a woman loses 37 pounds in 5 months, Johnny? Carson said nothing. She disappears, piece by piece, behind the locked door of a palace bathroom, while 750 million people wait outside to watch her fairy tale. The night before the wedding, the morning of the wedding, standing in a bathroom with a tiara in my hair, I did the only thing I had left, because there was nothing else I could control. The studio audience, 312 people, was absolutely silent. Camera operator Ron DiCarlo would later describe the silence as physical. You could feel it pressing against your chest, he said, like the air had weight. Do not go anywhere. This is the part that changes everything. Carson opened his mouth, closed it. His right hand, which had been resting on the desk, moved to his tie. He loosened it, not dramatically, not for effect, but the way a man loosens his tie when he realizes the conversation he is in will be longer and harder than anything he prepared for. Diana, he said. He had been calling her Your Highness for the first 11 minutes. This was the first time he used her name. What happened on the wedding night? A breath. 2 breaths. Charles didn't come to bed until after 2. He had been on the phone. I could hear his voice through the wall but not the words. She paused. I already knew who he was talking to. Everyone knew. The entire palace knew. I was the last person in England to understand what everyone else had understood from the beginning. Camilla, Carson said quietly. I didn't say that name for 3 years, Diana said. 3 years of marriage and I couldn't say her name? I called her the other one. My staff called her the Rottweiler. The Queen called her nothing at all, which was worse. Silence is agreement in that family. Carson's jaw tightened, a small movement, invisible to the audience, visible to the camera in close-up. I know something about silence in a marriage, he said. He was not performing now. I've been married 3 times, and each time I stood at that altar, I believed it. Every word, every promise. And each time I was performing. Not for the cameras, for her, whoever she was that year. I performed the version of Johnny Carson that I thought she wanted. He stopped. His hand was still on his loosened tie. The real one was never enough. Diana looked at him. For the first time in the interview, she was not the one being studied. She was studying him. Neither was the real me, she said. 17 seconds of silence. 17 seconds on live television is not a pause. It is a void. It is the kind of silence that makes producers reach for the commercial break button, that makes camera operators glance at each other, that makes studio audiences shift in their seats and wonder if something has gone wrong with the broadcast. Fred de Cordova's hand was on the emergency cut switch. He did not press it. In those 17 seconds, Carson made a decision. He pushed his chair back from the desk. The wheels squeaked against the studio floor, a small, ugly sound in the silence. He stood. He picked up his chair with both hands, carried it around the front of the desk, and set it down next to Diana. Not across from her, beside her, close enough that his shoulder was 6 inches from hers. In 30 years of The Tonight Show, 10,477 episodes, Johnny Carson had never left his desk during an interview. The desk was his fortress, his boundary, the professional distance that allowed him to be warm without being vulnerable, curious without being exposed. Every guest who had ever sat across from him understood the unspoken contract. You sit there, I sit here, and the desk between us keeps us both safe. Carson broke that contract with a squeak of chair wheels. He sat down beside Diana, and he said nothing for 3 more seconds. Then tell me the rest. Diana turned the ring outward on her finger. The sapphire caught the studio lights for the first time all night, throwing blue reflections across the desk that no one was sitting behind anymore. I threw myself down the stairs, she said, at Kensington Palace. I was 4 months pregnant with William. I threw myself down the stairs because I didn't know how else to make them hear me. Carson's hands resting on his knees began to tremble. Visibly, the camera caught it. And when I landed at the bottom, I wasn't badly hurt, but I could have been. The baby could have been. Do you know what they said? Diana's voice cracked for the first time. Not her composure. Her voice, the actual sound of it fractured. They said Diana is being hysterical again. The Queen Mother came out. She looked at me on the floor. She said, Diana, do get up. You're making a scene. And she walked away. Carson did not speak. He reached over and placed his hand, flat, open, still trembling, on the armrest of Diana's chair. Not on her hand, on the armrest. An offer, not an imposition. Diana looked at it for a moment. Then she placed her hand on top of his. No one, Not Carson, not the producers, not the 312 people in that studio moved. The red light on camera 2 went dark at 9:47 p.m. The segment had run 31 minutes, 19 minutes over schedule. The entire second half of the show was scrapped. 2 other guests were sent home. Fred de Cordova would later say he never even considered interrupting. What happened after the camera stopped was witnessed by only a handful of people: Gutierrez, 2 security officers, and Carson's personal assistant. Diana did not stand up immediately. Neither did Carson. They sat in those 2 chairs side by side in a studio that was emptying around them for another 40 minutes. Carson spoke about his son Rick, who had died in 1991, the same year, in a photography accident on a steep road near Cayucos, California. "I never cried on television," Carson told Diana. "I cried every night for 6 months in a house where no one could see me. Because Johnny Carson doesn't cry. That's not what Johnny Carson does." He looked at his hands. "I built a version of myself that everyone loved, and the version they loved wasn't real. And the real one, the one who lost his son and didn't know how to say it, that one sat alone." Diana listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "You understand." "I understand performing," Carson said. "I understand building a mask so perfect that people forget there's a face underneath." Diana stood to leave at 10:31. She paused at the door of the studio, turned back to Carson, and said 7 words that Gutierrez wrote down that same night in a pocket notebook she still keeps in a drawer. "No one has ever just sat next to me." Carson remained in his chair for another 20 minutes after Diana left. Alone, in a dark studio, in a chair that was still 6 inches from an empty one. The segment never aired. The 43 crew members who witnessed it signed non-disclosure agreements the following morning. The tape was locked in NBC's archive vault, not destroyed but sealed. Carson personally made the call. "That wasn't television," he told de Cordova. "That was a woman trusting a stranger. You don't sell that." Within 6 months, Diana would begin recording the secret tapes that became Andrew Morton's Diana, Her True Story. When the book was published in 1992, eating disorder helplines across the United Kingdom reported a 300% increase in calls within the first week. The Priory Clinic in London saw referrals double in a single month. Researchers would later call it the Diana effect, a permanent shift in public willingness to discuss eating disorders openly. Before Diana, bulimia was a word most people could not spell. After Diana, it was a word most people could not forget. On August 30th, 1997, Diana made her last phone call from the Ritz Hotel in Paris. She spoke to William and Harry, her last words to her sons, "I'll see you tomorrow." She did not see them tomorrow. The sapphire ring was not on her finger that night. She had removed it after the divorce, but in her bedside drawer at Kensington Palace, staff found a small white envelope. Inside was a Tonight Show cue card, pale blue, 5 by 7 inches. On it, in Carson's handwriting, 4 words, "You were always enough." She had kept it for 6 years, in the drawer closest to where she slept. Carson never knew. He died on January 23, 2005. In his Malibu home, taped inside his desk drawer, his assistant found a Polaroid photograph of 2 chairs, side by side, in an empty studio. No one sat in them, but they were close enough to touch. Maybe today, someone near you is performing the most convincing version of fine you have ever seen. Maybe the bravest thing you could do is not ask them what is wrong, but simply sit beside them and stay.